I spent my whole life in that oceanfront villa, raising my daughter, paying her bills, bailing her husband out of debt. One morning, I saw my own home listed for sale online, my signature forged. The deal already in motion. My heart sank, realizing my own blood saw me as nothing but an obstacle. But what they never imagined was that I had been quietly gathering proof, and the buyer waiting in the shadows was someone they least expected. When my daughter screamed in court, "That house is mine," a single name echoed through the room, and the shock on her face said it all. This is the story. My daughter sold my $2 million villa, but she never imagined who would buy it. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my voice reaches. The mornings in Santa Barbara had always been a quiet comfort. The ocean stretched out in front of my terrace, soft waves catching the early light, gulls dipping low in search of breakfast. A pot of coffee warmed my hands as I leaned back in my chair, letting the salt air remind me I was still alive, still anchored to this place I'd called home for decades. Routine had become my shield. At 78, a widower, the little patterns of life were all I had left to steady myself. Coffee, a glance at the paper, then emails, just enough to keep a connection with the world without being swallowed by it. That morning, though, the shield cracked. A headline caught my eye, not in the news, but on a real estate listing buried in the sidebar of my email. My breath stuck in my chest. The photo looked familiar. Too familiar. The sunlit terrace, the stone walls, the climbing roses my wife once tended. My villa. At first, I laughed quietly. Some scammer must have lifted the picture, posted it to lure a buyer. It happened often enough, but then I scrolled further. The address was correct, the description too precise, down to the oak library my wife and I had designed together. Even the asking price stared back at me, $2 million. My hand trembled as I set the cup down. The warmth of the coffee had turned to nothing in my grip. This wasn't some mistake. My home was being sold. I printed the page, the hum of the machine echoing far louder than it should have. The paper slid out, crisp and undeniable, and I carried it with me down the hall. Each step felt like a verdict being handed down. Marla was in the kitchen, phone in one hand, her hair swept up in that careless bun she wore when she thought no one was watching. She glanced up, eyes narrowing slightly as she saw the sheet of paper in my hand. "What's this?" I asked, voice steady but sharp. She took the page, barely glancing at it before setting it on the counter. "It's just paperwork. Dad." "Insurance forms, property tax stuff, nothing you need to worry about." Her tone carried the kind of rehearsed calm people use when they've already decided you won't understand. She even smiled, tight, dismissive. "I don't remember signing anything like this," I pressed, trying to keep my voice even. "You didn't have to. I handled it." Her eyes flickered, darting away from mine. "Honestly, Dad, you stress yourself out too much over things that aren't important, not important. The walls that held every memory I had left of my wife, the rooms where my grandchildren once played, reduced to a line item in her explanation. I didn't argue further. Something in me refused to let the suspicion spill into open anger. Instead, I let silence stretch, staring at the counter where the paper lay like an accusation. Later, sitting alone in the study, the weight of her words pressed in, too rehearsed, too quick. I thought of all the years behind us, college tuition paid, the down payment on our first home, the time I covered Darren's business failure so the bank wouldn't take his car. Every sacrifice had been made willingly, out of love, out of belief that family mattered more than money. But her tone this morning had carried something else, something colder. The villa had always been my anchor. Now, for the first time, it felt like sand shifting under my feet. "If it's just paperwork," I muttered to the empty room, "then why do I feel like a stranger in my own home?" A knock rattled the front door, heavy and unexpected. It broke through my thoughts like thunder over the ocean. When I opened it, Darren stood there, earlier than usual. His smile was stretched too thin, his eyes shadowed with something he tried to hide. The weight behind that knock lingered, carrying a warning I didn't yet understand. Darren stepped in with his usual forced smile, but behind his eyes, I caught the glint of desperation. Afternoon heat lay over the coast, hot. He paused at the threshold and looked past me, past the framed photos and the bowl of keys I've kept in the same place for 20 years. Place looks good, Everett, he said lightly. You keep it. Immaculate. The house hasn't changed, I answered. People do. He laughed too loudly and set a leather briefcase near the sofa. The smile held, but his gaze skipped around the room like a stone, touching down and bouncing off. He pointed at the thermostat, asked about the gardener, made an offhand comment about ocean-facing windows being an easy selling point. The words slid out before he seemed to realize. He cleared his throat. I mean, for valuation, insurance, you know. Do I? I asked. He shifted, then launched into chatter about traffic on the 101 and the cost of lumber, anything but what he was here for. When my silence stretched long enough to make the room ring, he picked up the briefcase and moved it toward the end table. A corner of a folder pushed up, a tab labeled in neat block letters. I recognized the name printed underneath before I understood why it burned. Kendra Vassell. Darren's phone vibrated. Excuse me. Gotta take this. He walked out to the patio and closed the slider. I stood for a count of 10, listening to his muffled voice through the glass. The folder's tab stared back at me. I didn't go riffling. I've lived too long to mistake impulsiveness for strength. But the flap opened just enough to show letterhead and a checklist. Photos taken. Disclosures pending. Buyer inquiries logged. No signatures. Not yet. The name field for seller had a single word where mine should have been. Kinsey. Something cold tightened along my spine. I eased the folder back as it was and returned to the kitchen. The kettle clicked off. I poured water over a tea bag with a steadiness that felt borrowed. Darren came back in, voice bright. All set. Work thing. Work? I said. Must be busy. It's always busy, he replied. That's why planning matters. For everybody. His eyes finally landed on mine and slid away. Marla mentioned dinner tonight. She thought it'd be good for us to talk. I said I'd be at the table at 6. He nodded, relieved, and reached for his briefcase. He hesitated, then left the folder where it had been, like a dare. At the door, he clapped my shoulder. We're all on the same team. I watched him walk down the path. The words "same team" clanged in my head like a lid on a pot that doesn't fit. At 6, the dining room looked staged. Marla set the good plates and polished forks. She kissed my cheek and told me I looked tired in a voice that sounded like concern and felt like a verdict. Darren poured wine, generous to the point of waste. To simpler living, he said, raising his glass. To honesty, I answered. They traded glances and laughed. A brittle sound. Conversation tiptoed around what mattered. Marla asked if I'd thought about taking the pressure off, maybe finding a community where there's help on hand. Darren described a place one of his clients' fathers liked, full of friends, no chores. Each phrase was wrapped in soft fabric, but inside was a brick. I cut my steak into neat squares and chewed. The house hummed, the sea, the faint tap of eucalyptus on the gutter. I thought of the folder and of Kendra's name, of the way Marla's signature curls on a line, of the blank where mine belonged. Dad, Marla said carefully, we worry about you here alone. Stairs, storms. What if something happens? Then you'll drive over the hill and check on me, I said. Her mouth thinned. It's not that simple. It usually is. Darren reached for the bottle. We just want what's best. For whom? I asked. He looked at his plate. Marla stood, collecting dishes. Let's not make this hard, she said. Hard isn't the word I'd pick, I said. Surprising. Maybe. She carried plates into the kitchen. Darren followed with the salad bowl. Their voices dropped. I stayed seated and stared at the linen napkin, the narrow hem my wife had sewn years ago, the small uneven stitch where the thread had knotted and she'd refused to redo it because imperfections keep us humble. Water ran. A drawer opened. Closed. I heard Darren's whisper through the vent. Thin. Confident. A man who believes the room is his. Once it's signed, he won't have a say anymore. The words entered me like cold metal. I let them sit. The old habit would have been to walk in, raise my voice, call a lawyer at the table. Instead, I dabbed my mouth and stood, steady, in the kitchen doorway. Marla turned, chin high. "Dad, thank you for dinner," I said. "I'm going to rest." Darren's smile came back, weaker now. "Sleep well, Everett. Big day tomorrow." "For whom?" I repeated, and went down the hall. In the bedroom, the sea was louder. I opened the window and sat on the edge of the bed. Silence is not surrender. It is a tool in the hands of someone who knows when to use it. The house had not betrayed me. People do. On the nightstand lay a small notebook where I keep appointments. I wrote a name, Kendra Vassell. Then another, Royce Bennington. I added a time. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. I closed the notebook and set it beside the lamp. In the mirror, a thin man with careful shoulders met my eyes. Their plan was in motion. So was mine. The villa had never felt so quiet. Hours slipped by. But sleep never came. The ceiling above seemed to blur as thoughts crowded in, each heavier than the last. Years of sacrifice unraveled in memory, the tuition checks I wrote for Marla without hesitation, the nights spent working overtime to cover Darren's failed ventures, the countless times I gave without asking for anything in return. Those sacrifices had once felt like love made visible, but tonight they twisted into bitter questions. Where had I gone wrong? When had my daughter begun to see me not as her father, but as an obstacle? A shadow of regret passed through me with each tick of the clock. The unease from dinner still lingered, thick as coastal fog seeping into the house. Each word, each look, played on repeat, gnawing at the edges of trust. Restlessness pushed me from the bed. The villa's floor felt cool beneath bare feet as I moved down the hallway. The old oak banister was smooth under my hand, worn by decades of use. I paused in the living room, letting my fingers trace the frames on the wall. There was Marla at 6, grinning with missing teeth. Marla at 16, nervously holding her diploma. Beside those photos was one of my late wife, her smile alive even in stillness. Each corner of this home carried a story, a memory layered over stone and wood, until the villa had become more than walls. It was my life's legacy. The weight of that realization pressed hard. Losing the house wouldn't just mean giving up shelter. It would mean surrendering the last pieces of family history that tethered me to this earth. Every chair, every picture, every room whispered a reminder of what was at stake. As I drifted toward the study, faint voices carried down the hall. My breath caught. At this hour, only 2 people could be awake, Marla and Darren. The door was cracked just enough for sound to escape. Marla's voice was hushed, careful. "Dad doesn't need to know everything. It's for his own good." A long silence followed. Then Darren's voice, sharp and businesslike. "The buyer's waiting. If we stall, we'll lose millions." The words slammed into me like a blow. My legs stiffened, my hand tightening on the doorframe to steady myself. There was no more room for doubt. This wasn't a misunderstanding. My daughter wasn't protecting me, she was cutting me out. My chest tightened. Yet beneath the sting of betrayal, something else flickered. Resolve. The days of silent endurance had brought me here, but silence had bought me nothing. I clenched my fist, whispering to the empty hall, "If they think I'll sit quietly while they erase my life, they're wrong." I turned away, moving back into the darkness of the house with a steadiness I hadn't felt in years. Betrayal burned hot, but resolve glowed brighter. Tonight, the line had been crossed. That night, I decided silence had protected no one. It was time to act. The first light of dawn slipped through the blinds, casting long streaks across the bedroom floor. Sleep had never truly come. The whispers from the night before still pressed on my chest like a weight that refused to lift. I sat at the edge of the bed, staring at my shoes, and knew I could no longer stay silent. My hand shook only once when I picked up the phone. Royce answered on the second ring, his voice already sharp, already awake. I laid out everything: the listing, the HOA letter, the open house, the late-night whispers that cut deeper than any argument ever could. He didn't waste time with sympathy. "Bring me every scrap of paper you have," he said flatly. "Mail, cards, notices, whatever they've left lying around. We'll sort it. Meet me at the office in an hour." That was enough. The grief that had followed me these past days stiffened into something else: purpose. I gathered the HOA notice, Kendra's glossy card, even the envelopes I had nearly tossed away. With each piece tucked into a folder, my resolve grew harder. This wasn't just about property anymore. This was about refusing to be erased. Royce's downtown office smelled faintly of coffee and old leather. The walls were lined with case photos and a large calendar where entire days were blocked in red marker: trials, filings, emergency hearings. He ushered me in with a nod and shut the door. "Let's see it," he said. I laid the papers on his desk. His fingers moved quickly, scanning, sorting, then pulling up county records on his screen. He stopped suddenly, lips pressed thin. "Everett," he said, turning the monitor toward me. My name stared back at me from a document I had never seen: a power of attorney. Marla's name beneath mine, marked as attorney in fact, dated 2 weeks ago, notarized electronically. The signature looked like mine, but only at first glance. A curve too stiff, an angle too sharp. It wasn't mine. The room felt colder. Royce explained in that steady lawyer's cadence. It was likely forged, invalid, but dangerous nonetheless. If left unchecked, it gave them apparent authority to act as though they held the pen for my life. He laid out the plan: revocation notice, cease and desist to the agent, injunction filing to freeze any conveyance. I remembered where they could have found it: the refinance file from years ago, uploaded to a family cloud folder. Careless trust. That trust was now twisted into a weapon. The sting of humiliation threatened to pull me under, but clarity rose stronger. I would not let them sweep me aside. Royce was already drafting documents, each keystroke striking like a drumbeat. He slid a copy toward me. Notice of revocation. I signed with deliberate care, each letter a line in the sand. An hour later, Royce patched me into a conference call with the title company. His tone was clipped, professional, but the news dropped like a stone in my gut. A new escrow had already been opened. A deposit was sitting in their account as of that morning. The buyer was listed only as an LLC, one of those shells that told you nothing but hinted at everything. The name pattern was familiar, too polished to be random. I thought of the HOA, of Travis and his talk of community standards. My stomach nodded. Royce wasted no time. He had his assistant pull the file while dialing Travis directly. The call was polite on the surface but laced with warning. Travis spoke of open house fines, community violations, and rules as though reading from a manual. But when Royce pressed about the buyer, his voice slid evasive, slippery. After the call ended, Royce told me to back up my Ring camera footage, document every interaction, and wait for the filings to move through. "Do not confront them yet," he warned. "The law works best before fists fly." Relief flickered for the first time. Not victory, but motion. Still, the scale of the scheme gnawed at me. This wasn't clumsy family betrayal. It was calculated, professional. By late afternoon, Royce's voice carried the weight of command as he looped me into a three-way call with Kendra Vassell. "Mr. Mahan? This is unnecessary," she said briskly. Her tone clipped, like she had no time for an old man's protests. "We have a valid power of attorney and a signed listing agreement on file. The sale is legitimate." Royce cut in before I could answer, serving the revocation and cease and desist via email right in the middle of the call. His words were precise, each syllable designed to leave no wiggle room. "You are on notice. Any further action will be treated as fraud, subject to professional discipline and injunctive relief." Kendra scoffed. "Our buyer needs occupancy by the end of the month." "You're only delaying the inevitable." I spoke then, my voice steady, measured. "No one takes my home without looking me in the eye." Silence. Then a sharp click as she ended the call. Royce allowed himself a thin smile, but before it could settle, His paralegal stepped into the office, eyes wide. "We just got an alert from MLS," she said, holding out her tablet. "A lockbox code request hit minutes ago. It came from the buyer's LLC account." For a moment, the room froze. Someone was already trying to walk into my house. The locks clicked into place one by one, a sound that felt like armor being strapped on before battle. Fresh brass gleamed against the old wooden doors, and the notices I'd taped across each entryway fluttered in the noon breeze. "Revoked. Trespassers will be prosecuted." It was a small piece of paper, but in that moment, it carried the weight of my entire life. I pulled a chair to the foyer and sat down facing the front door. Like a sentry, a 78-year-old man, alone in his villa, daring anyone to walk through without his say. The place had never felt so quiet, yet I'd never felt so alert. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the refrigerator sounded louder, as though the house itself was holding its breath with me. The villa wasn't just walls and windows, it was memory carved into plaster and paint. Each hallway held a laugh, each corner a shadow of my late wife's presence. Sitting there, I vowed to guard it the way a soldier guards a flag. For the first time in days, anger steadied my hands. By early afternoon, the knock came. A man in a navy work shirt stood outside, tool bag slung over one shoulder. "I'm here to install the lockbox," he said, holding up a handheld device. "Scheduled by Kendra Vassell." I rose slowly, careful to keep my voice even. "There won't be any lockbox here." "The listing is fraudulent," he frowned, scrolling through his device. "I've got authorization, contract in place. This address?" This time, I stepped outside, blocking the doorway with my body. "Authorization forged. Notice of revocations right here." I pointed to the paper taped to the glass. The exchange grew sharp. He insisted he had work to do. I insisted he'd be trespassing if he touched that door. My phone camera recorded the whole thing, the red dot blinking like a heartbeat. "Finally," he muttered. They said the place was already sold. Before turning away, frustrated. His truck rattled down the drive, leaving me with the chill of his parting words. Already sold. My blood ran cold, but I stood firm. Not an hour later, the next blow came, this one cut deeper. Inez Mallory, my neighbor of 20 years, waved me over as I walked to fetch the mail. Her voice carried, as it always did, sharp enough to draw a few curious eyes from across the street. "Everett, why don't you just let them handle things? Everyone knows you can't keep up with this place anymore. Darren says you've been slipping." A couple of neighbors edged closer, pretending to fuss with their sprinklers, their trash bins. Whispers spread like smoke. I bit down on the humiliation, felt it sting worse than any stranger's insult. To hear my own daughter and son-in-law painting me as incompetent, it was a wound no lock could defend. Inez smirked, shaking her head. "The community needs stability. Everett, maybe it's time you think about what's best for everyone else." I wanted to lash out, to tell her what stability I'd bought with decades of work, what roof I'd built with my own hands. Instead, I stood silent, only saying, "Thank you for your concern." Before turning back inside, let them whisper. Let them believe I was finished. Proof would be my answer, not rage. By evening, the villa glowed faintly in the falling dusk. Lights flickered on in neighboring houses, each window a reminder of the judgment I'd felt that afternoon. I sat by the window with the phone pressed to my ear, updating Royce. "They tried to get a lockbox in today," I said, "and Darren's already poisoning the neighborhood." Royce's voice was steady. "It's good you recorded it. The TRO hearing's in 2 days. You hold steady until then. No confrontations. Let the law do the talking. 2 days. I hung up, staring at the outlines of the ocean through the glass. 2 days to hold the line. 2 days to keep them out. To endure the whispers and the sideways glances. I whispered into the quiet room. "I can manage that. But will they wait that long?" The sound of tires crunching against the gravel jolted me awake before the sun had fully lifted over the horizon. A knock, firm, deliberate, echoed through the villa. For a moment, my heart raced the way it had when I was a boy caught sneaking in past curfew. But I wasn't a boy anymore. I was 78, standing in my own home, already marked as a man out of place in his own life. Two uniformed officers waited outside, their posture rigid but not hostile. "Mr. Mahan?" one asked. "We received a wellness call. Someone said you might be in danger, or confused." The words cut deeper than they should have. Confused. Unsafe. It was the picture Marla and Darren wanted painted of me, an old man no longer capable of holding the reins. I steadied my voice. "Officers, I assure you, I'm fine. Come inside if you need proof." They stepped in, eyes flicking across the revocation notice taped to my front door, the stacks of documents on the table, the camera perched in the corner. I handed them a copy of the TRO filing Royce had prepared. One officer lingered on the pages, his brow softening. "Sir, you seem sharper than half my neighbors." His partner gave a short nod, and with a touch of reluctance, they left. Still, the humiliation burned. To be treated as a fragile relic by the very people meant to protect me. It was exactly the narrative Marla wanted the world to believe. By mid-morning, another blow arrived. A hand-delivered envelope bore the HOA seal, the kind of formal ink meant to intimidate. Inside, the notice cited me for obstruction of authorized access and community disruption. I barely had time to curse before Travis Holcomb appeared in person. Crisp polo shirt and clipboard in hand, his tone oiled with authority. "You're in violation, Everett, locking out authorized personnel, making scenes at your property. It reflects poorly on the community." My fists clenched, but I forced myself to breathe. "Travis, I built this life brick by brick. You think a stack of signatures means more than 40 years of sweat?" His lips twitched. "This isn't personal. The community has already moved forward. If you don't comply, fines will escalate. Amenities suspended. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I saw it then. The HOA wasn't neutral. They'd aligned themselves with whoever stood to profit from this sale. The web stretched wider than I'd imagined. I called Royce the moment Travis walked away. His voice came through steady, the calm of a man who thrived on storms. "They're showing desperation. Everett, these wellness checks, the HOA games, they know their plan is slipping. Feels like they're closing in. They're bluffing," he said. "The TRO hearings tomorrow. Today we file affidavits, subpoena escrow files, and pin down the truth. Just hold the line one more day." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. His words gave me something stronger than comfort, a sense of ground beneath my feet. That afternoon, I gathered everything into a folder. Photographs of Marla as a child by the pool, the original deed, letters from my late wife, even the video from yesterday's attempted lockbox entry. Each piece was more than evidence. It was my life, layered and real, impossible to erase. By sunset, I sat on the porch watching neighbors pass. Some offered polite nods. Others cast glances thick with gossip. I wondered which version of me they believed. The proud homeowner or the senile old man clinging to walls he couldn't keep. The roses caught my eye, planted by my wife years ago, still blooming with defiance against the salt air. Her laughter seemed to drift with the evening breeze, reminding me why this fight mattered. "They may see an old man," I whispered, "but this house is proof of a life well lived, and I won't hand it over." That's when I noticed the car. Darren's sedan idled down the block, headlights dark, engine humming low. Watching. Waiting. Tomorrow wasn't going to be about whispers or papers. Tomorrow would be face to face. The courthouse steps felt heavier than I remembered, each one echoing like a hammer in my chest. The morning sun glared off the pale stone, too bright for what was coming. Darren's car was already parked at the curb, sleek and polished, the kind of car that always seemed to sneer at me. Marla stepped out beside him, her heels clicking sharp against the pavement. She was dressed to impress, tailored blazer, hair perfectly set, face painted with confidence. Smug. She looked smug. For a moment, I faltered. My daughter, my own flesh and blood, was about to stand across from me in a courtroom. The weight of that truth made my knees feel weaker than the stairs did. But then I felt Royce's hand on my shoulder. Steady as an anchor, he had a folder tucked under his arm, his stride crisp, his jaw set. "We're ready," he said quietly. I nodded, more for myself than for him. Inside, the courthouse was cool and sterile, marble floors reflecting the faint echoes of footsteps. Security was quick, the metal detector buzzed, and I watched Darren smirk as I fumbled with the change in my pocket. He always enjoyed making me look small. I told myself that today would be different. We entered the courtroom. The judge's bench towered above us, polished wood gleaming under the lights. My throat felt tight, but I straightened my back. Royce leaned toward me, whispering, "Just answer plainly. Let me do the heavy lifting." The judge entered, robes flowing, and called us to order. Royce began with our petition, a request for a temporary restraining order to halt the sale of my villa. His words were precise, his tone even. For a moment, I dared to believe it might be simple, but then Marla's attorney rose, a man in a slick suit, younger than Royce, voice dripping with false concern. He produced papers, claiming they showed I was no longer competent to manage my affairs. He waved them like a trophy, explaining they were medical records from a recent evaluation. My stomach turned cold. The papers bore a doctor's note, claiming I suffered cognitive decline, but I knew that handwriting, that letterhead. It was forged. They'd taken pieces of my past medical files and twisted them into something new. "Your Honor," Royce interrupted, his voice firm, "we contest the validity of these documents. My client is fully competent, as this court will hear directly from him." I swallowed hard and stood. My voice shook at first, but I steadied it. I spoke about the lockbox attempt, about the wellness check, about the HOA letter. And then I played the recording from my phone, the locksmith at my door insisting the house was already sold. The judge leaned forward, his expression sharpening. As I spoke, something shifted. The humiliation of being painted as a senile old man began to burn away, replaced by something steadier. My words carried weight because they were true, plain, unpolished. I saw the judge glance at me, then at Marla, and I caught a flicker of doubt cross his face. But the assault wasn't over. The doors opened, and in walked Travis Holcomb from the HOA. His presence hit me like a cold draft. He took the stand, siding with Marla and Darren. He spoke about community concerns, about me being a disruptive influence, about stability. His voice was smooth, but his eyes darted nervously. He referenced the staged complaints, the so-called wellness check. For a moment, I felt surrounded. My daughter, my son-in-law, even the HOA standing against me. But Royce pounced. He demanded proof, asked for records of board votes, pointed out inconsistencies. Travis faltered under the pressure, his polished lines fraying at the edges. The judge raised a hand. "Enough. This matter requires more evidence than I have today." He paused, looking between us. "Until then, no sale or transfer of the property shall occur." Relief washed through me, not in a flood but in a slow, steady tide. It wasn't victory, but it was a wall between me and disaster. I caught Marla's face, tight, her lips pressed thin, eyes flashing with something close to panic. Darren leaned in to whisper, his jaw tense. We filed out together, tension thick in the air. On the courthouse steps, Inez Mallory was waiting. She leaned against the railing, a cruel smile on her face. "Enjoy your little win, Everett," she sneered. "It won't last." Her words stung, but as I stepped into the sunlight, I felt different. Not beaten down, not humiliated, steadied. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time, I felt the tide shift. The villa looked different when I returned from the courthouse. The stucco walls, bathed in late sunlight, seemed to breathe again, alive, mine, and safe, at least for now. My steps echoed heavier than usual across the tiled entryway, the kind of weight that comes from carrying both exhaustion and relief. The judge's freeze order had bought me time, but time alone wasn't victory. Royce called not long after I set my briefcase down on the kitchen counter. His voice was steady, reassuring. "You did well today," he said. "But don't mistake this for retreat. They'll push harder. Everett, stay vigilant." I promised him I would. Hanging up, I stood in the quiet of my living room, the ceiling fan circling lazily above, and let the peace settle into me, even if only a thin layer over the unease pressing beneath. Later, I stepped out to water the roses by the front yard. The garden hose hissed as cool streams arched into the soil. That's when I noticed Inez Mallory standing across the street, arms folded, her ever-present sunglasses perched low on her nose. A couple of other neighbors lingered beside her, their whispers drifting like smoke. Inez didn't bother to lower her voice. "The judge only felt sorry for him," she said, loud enough for me and anyone else within earshot. "He's slipping. Everyone knows it. That villa should belong to someone who can manage it." A small chuckle rippled through the group. My hand tightened around the hose nozzle, water pooling at my shoes. Humiliation burned hotter than the California sun overhead. My own front yard, once a sanctuary, had become a stage for gossip, but shame quickly hardened. If they wanted to whisper, let them. I had survived storms far stronger than idle talk. I turned off the water, coiled the hose slowly, deliberately, and walked back inside with my head held high. The villa was mine, and no amount of poison in the air would strip me of that truth. Hours later, as night folded itself around Santa Barbara, a pair of headlights sliced across my driveway. Tires crunched gravel, then silence. I rose from my chair, heart drumming steady, and opened the front door. A thick envelope lay on the mat, stamped with the HOA's seal. Inside was a letter from Travis Holcomb, printed in officious language dripping with false authority. They cited disrepair and violations of community standards, warning of steep fines and even forced sale if not remedied promptly. I nearly laughed. My villa, meticulously cared for, with every shutter painted and every rose trimmed, labeled derelict. The rage came sharp, followed by disbelief. They weren't just trying to strip me of my home through signatures. They were weaponizing the HOA to push me out like an unwanted tenant. I set the letter on the dining table under the dim glow of the chandelier, staring at it as though it were a declaration of war. For a moment, fatigue pulled at me, whispering of surrender. But then I thought of my wife planting roses in the same soil I tended earlier, of birthdays and anniversaries lived within these walls. This fight was consuming me, yes, but it was also fueling something deeper, resolve sharper than steel. A knock shattered the stillness. Too late for a friendly neighbor, too deliberate to ignore. I walked to the door, each step echoing through the villa like a drumbeat. When I opened it, Darren stood on the porch, his silhouette framed by the porch light, a smirk cutting across his face. The courthouse, it seemed, had only been round one. The knock still echoed in my ears when I pulled the door wide open. Darren stood there, smirk plastered across his face, arms folded like he owned the place already. He didn't even try to hide the satisfaction of showing up uninvited in the dead of night. "You think a piece of paper can stop me, old man?" he said, waving a folder with exaggerated flair. "This isn't over, not even close." My hand gripped the edge of the doorframe tighter. He wanted to rattle me, to see me lose my cool, but I held my ground. His arrogance dripped off every word, but beneath that swagger was desperation. "Funny," I replied evenly. "I thought people who truly owned something didn't have to come knocking at midnight with threats." His smirk faltered, just slightly. But then he stepped closer, lowering his voice. "We've got evidence you won't be able to shake. You'll be out of here before the month ends." Before I could answer, headlights swept across the driveway. Marla's car pulled in, and within moments she was striding up the walkway. She didn't hesitate. This little ambush had been planned. "Dad," she started, her tone sharp and bitter. "You're embarrassing yourself, clinging to this house like it's the only thing that makes you matter." Her words cut deeper than Darren's smug threats. "I raised you here. I worked my entire life so you'd never want for anything," I said, voice thick but steady. She scoffed. And you think that makes me owe you forever? You think you can dangle your sacrifices over my head until the day you die? No, Dad, this place, it's wasted on you. It's time it served a real purpose. I could hear Darren egging her on, whispering, "That's it. Marla, tell him." Neighbors' curtains twitched across the street, shadows moving in windows. They were watching. I realized in that moment, this wasn't just about scaring me. They wanted to humiliate me in front of my own community. Marla leaned in, venom in her eyes. "You owe me this house. You owe me for every time you failed to be the father I needed." Something in me hardened. "No," I said firmly, louder now so even the neighbors could hear. "What I owe you, Marla, I've already given education, shelter, second chances, more than you ever earned with this kind of betrayal. This house is my legacy, and I won't let you take it." Darren tried to shove a paper toward me, but I stepped back and calmly closed the door in their faces. The latch clicked with finality. For the first time that night, I saw shock flicker in both of their eyes, through the glass pane, inside. I sank into my chair, fists trembling. The anger burned hot, but it wasn't aimless anymore. It was fuel. I opened my journal and scrawled across a fresh page. If they want war at my doorstep, they'll get it, but on my terms. As I set the pen down, my phone buzzed on the table. A message from Royce lit the screen. "We need to meet first thing tomorrow." Urgent. The word urgent pulsed in the dark like a warning flare, keeping me awake long after their silhouettes faded from the porch. Morning sunlight stretched across the coast as I pulled into Royce's downtown office, the courthouse confrontation still heavy in my chest. My body was tired, but my mind sharper than it had been in years. Every step toward that office felt like marching deeper into a war I hadn't asked for, but one I could no longer avoid. Royce was waiting by the glass doors, his expression grave, hands clasped like a man bracing for impact. Inside, the room smelled of leather-bound books and fresh coffee. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Everett," he said, gesturing toward the seat across from his desk. "I've uncovered something you need to see, something bigger than I expected." His voice carried weight, the kind that made me straighten my back and hold my breath. Royce slid a folder across the desk. "Your son-in-law and daughter filed paperwork through HOA channels, with Kendra Vassal's help." I leaned forward, eyes scanning the stamped documents. At first, they looked like ordinary notices, but then the words leapt off the page. "Petition of guardianship based on cognitive decline." It hit like a stone in the gut. "They're saying I'm incompetent?" My voice cracked with anger. Royce nodded grimly. "They've attached fabricated medical records, claims you're showing signs of dementia. They're using this to justify Marla's power of attorney. If the board sides with them, you could be stripped of decision-making before the hearing even begins." The room tilted for a moment. Betrayal had been an ember burning slow inside me, but this poured gasoline over it. My daughter, my blood, had signed her name to a lie that painted me as a man too feeble to know his own address. I closed the folder carefully, my hands trembling not with fear but fury. Royce's tone hardened. "We can fight this, but timing is crucial. The HOA has a hearing in 2 weeks. We have to gather counter-evidence immediately." I exhaled slowly, anger stiffening into steel. "Then we'll fight. They've underestimated the old man they're trying to bury." Royce leaned back, eyes narrowing. "There may be a way to tilt the field." He tapped his pen against the desk. "I've heard that your neighbor, Inez Mallory, has recordings, private ones. Word is, Darren bragged to her about railroading you. If she still has those files, it could shatter their credibility." I blinked, disbelief and bitterness colliding. Inez Mallory, the woman who mocked me on my driveway, the one who spread gossip about me losing my mind. Her? Royce raised his hands, seeing the protest in my eyes. "I know what she's done to humiliate you, but evidence is evidence. If she has recordings, even grudging testimony from her could bury Darren." For a moment, pride swelled like a stubborn knot in my chest. Asking her for help felt like handing her another weapon to use against me. But then I saw the papers again. The forged diagnosis. My daughter's signature beside it. Pride had no place in survival. If she has what you say, I finally muttered, then I'll face her, even if it means swallowing every insult she's ever thrown my way. Royce gave a small nod, his lips curving in the first hint of a smile. That's the man I knew you were. I stepped out of Royce's office into the blinding daylight, the ocean air filling my lungs. My legs felt steadier than when I'd arrived. They thought age made me weak, that my silence proved surrender, but silence had ended the moment I heard their whispers. Driving back toward the villa, I rehearsed my next moves in my head, contacting Inez, gathering documents, bracing for the next attack. At my doorstep, a shadow waited, a certified envelope with bold letters stamped across its front. Urgent. HOA. Hearing notice. I picked it up slowly. The paper was thin, but it weighed like stone in my palm. This wasn't just a letter, it was the verdict of my life, waiting to be written. The envelope had been waiting for me on the porch, its bold red stamp screaming urgent before I even tore it open. My hands shook, not from age, but from the anticipation of one more blow. The paper inside confirmed it. The HOA had summoned me to a formal hearing. The language was cold, almost clinical. Phrases like mentally unfit, mismanagement of property, and endangerment of community standards. Each line read like an accusation carved into stone, a public branding meant to erase nearly 8 decades of a man's life. Humiliation washed over me, but beneath it, a sharper blade of anger cut through. Marla, my own daughter, had sat somewhere, drafting this picture of me as a confused old man who couldn't manage his own home. She had once clutched my hand at her mother's funeral, promising to take care of me. Now she was using that same grief as ammunition to strip me of dignity. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the letter until the words blurred. My late wife's chair beside me felt empty in a way that broke something deep, but I forced myself upright, grabbed the letter, and drove to Royce's office. Royce read the summons without a word, his jaw tightening as his eyes moved across the page. Finally, he set it down and looked at me with the kind of seriousness that cuts through any pretense. "This," he said slowly, "is more dangerous than the TRO hearing. They're not just trying to sell your house anymore. Everett, they want to prove you incompetent. If they succeed, you won't have a voice in any legal matter involving this property or anything else." The fury inside me boiled over. "They're trying to bury me alive," I muttered. My voice cracked, but not from weakness. It was the crack of a whip. Everything I gave Marla, her tuition, her first house, bailing Darren out of his gambling debt, and this is how she repays me, by calling me senile in front of strangers. Royce let me vent, then leaned in. "They're desperate, which means we can fight back, and we have more than just truth on our side. We have their sloppiness." He pulled a binder from his shelf, flipping it open to the HOA bylaws. His finger tapped a section buried halfway down a page. "Competency rulings," he explained. "According to this, the board has to vote unanimously to declare a homeowner unfit. One dissent blocks the entire motion." I leaned closer, reading the lines for myself. My heart steadied for the first time in days. "So if even one of them says no—" "Exactly. And Travis Holcomb is on that board." Royce's eyes narrowed. "He may have thrown his weight around against you, but he's not known for bending rules. If we pressure the board with enough evidence of your clarity, Travis may balk at a vote that reeks of fraud." The first glimmer of hope pierced through the dread. Not certainty, but a path, a way forward. For weeks I'd felt like a man boxed into a corner, waiting for the final blow. Now, there was an opening. I exhaled slowly. "So it's not just about truth. It's about strategy." Royce smiled faintly. "Now you're thinking like a man who intends to win." That night, the villa felt foreign. Marla's scent of perfume lingered in the hallways. Darren's shoes scuffed the hardwood. My home looked the same, yet every corner whispered of intrusion. I sat in my wife's old chair, running a hand across the worn fabric. The memory of her planting roses in the yard surfaced, her voice saying, "This house is where our family roots run deepest." I whispered back, "I won't let them rip those roots out." As if on cue, my phone buzzed on the table. An unknown number. The message was brief. "Meet me tomorrow. I have proof Darren can't hide." The word proof glowed on the screen, heavier than the phone in my hand. Proof. Maybe the weapon I had been waiting for. The cafe on Cabrillo Boulevard buzzed with quiet conversations. The kind where voices blended into a soft hum against the clinking of cups. I slipped into the corner booth, my back to the wall, and waited. The message had been clear. "Meet me. I have proof Darren can't hide." What I hadn't expected was to see Kendra Vassell slide into the seat across from me, her hands trembling as though the weight of the world pressed on them. She didn't waste time. Out came a flash drive, a manila envelope, and eyes darting toward the door. "I can't carry this anymore," she whispered. "They forced me into it. Darren promised me a cut if I helped push your villa through." Her fingers pushed the papers across the table, escrow emails showing side payments, Darren's kickback terms, and the voice memo that nearly froze my breath. His voice, unmistakable. Instructing a notary, "Fast-track the POA. The old man won't notice." It wasn't anger I felt. Not at first. It was vindication. Finally, something more than suspicion in whispers. I phoned Royce immediately, and his voice sharpened through the receiver. "Bring it to the board hearing tonight. That changes everything." As I stepped out of the cafe, the Pacific air cut through me. Proof in hand, their lies no longer lived in shadows. The HOA boardroom brimmed with the kind of false civility only money and pressure could buy. Darren adjusted his tie, Marla smoothed her blazer, smug as if the room already belonged to her. Royce stood tall at my side, his briefcase heavier than any burden I had carried that week. Marla's voice pierced the air first. "My father is unfit to manage property. We have affidavits, medical notes, and testimony that show he can no longer make sound decisions." She waved the stack of papers like they were gospel. A few neighbors nodded. Others glanced at me with pity. I kept my silence, eyes fixed on Royce. When he spoke, his words cut clean. "The board requires unanimity to pursue such claims. But before we even discuss that, we move to admit new evidence." He slid Kendra's flash drive into the projector. Darren's voice echoed across the chamber, instructing fraud, naming sums, detailing his plan. The silence afterward was heavier than any gavel. Travis Holcomb cleared his throat. "These are serious allegations. Forged authority, elder financial abuse. This hearing cannot continue as framed." Darren sputtered, red-faced. "This is slander," Marla hissed. "It's too late. New ownership's already secured. He'll be out regardless." But the room had shifted. Whispers rose. Not against me, but against them. Their story cracked under the weight of evidence. The door creaked open. I turned, and there stood Inez Mallory, my neighbor, my critic, my tormentor these past weeks. She carried a leather folder, her chin high. "Travis," she said calmly, "I have something to place on record." When she spoke, the floor seemed to tilt. "I am the beneficial owner of the LLC and escrow for this property. I purchased it not to remove Everett Mahan, but to protect him. A life estate in his name has already been executed, irrevocable during his lifetime. He may reside here, host family, even renovate modestly. Dues are prepaid." Gasps spread across the room. Marla's face drained of color. Darren's jaw slackened. Inez glanced at me once, steady, before turning back to the board. "You all know what he did for this community. When my fence fell after Nora passed, he showed up with nails and a hammer, no questions asked. Consider this me returning the favor." Travis noted the declaration, halted Marla's competency petition, and announced referral of fraud evidence to county investigators. Apologies were offered, not enough to erase the harm, but enough to affirm I wasn't the broken old man they painted me to be. That night, the villa welcomed me back with a silence that felt earned. I sat in Nora's chair, Kendra's confession on record, Darren and Marla gone without words, and Inez's life estate clause tucked into my pocket. This wasn't about bricks or wood anymore. It was about legacy, about not surrendering what a lifetime had built. I whispered to the empty room, maybe to Nora, maybe to myself. They thought age made me easy prey, but tonight I kept my name. The lesson felt carved in stone. Title and trust matter. Yes, but so does teaching your children boundaries, and choosing dignity when love is twisted into leverage. A house can be taken, but a home must be surrendered. Tonight, I did not surrender.